Greetings, mortals! It is I, Remortis, and we're finally back to Rogue Trader. This time coming up with some new guides as well as updated guides for the DLC Void Shadows. And this DLC is freaking awesome. It gives you new archetypes to play around with, a new character, as well as a few updates that went alongside it, as well as before it too. So we're going to be going over several different builds throughout the next couple of days and weeks. And we'll be starting off with none other than a variation of one of my personal favorite builds, the Pyromancer Warrior. This is a tanky build that likes to set themselves on fire, and then thanks to the newest DLC archetype, the Executioner, we can do incredible amounts of damage with our damage over times and burns, and also still maintain our incredible tankiness without having to go with Vanguard. Now, I do want to caveat there is a variation of this build by going with Blade Dancer, and that's more offensive and kind of glass cannon-y, but we'll save that for another video. For this one, we will be going with the Warrior into Executioner. This build completely works on Unfair. I've been live streaming this build, and you can check my VODs if you so desire, and we're currently in the middle of Act 4. And without further ado, let's just get right into it, shall we? When you're choosing your Pyromancer Executioner, there's really two different options you can go with. You can be either the more offensive and glass cannon-y Death World Blade Dancer Executioner Pyromancer, or you can go a tankier route and do the Forge World Warrior Executioner Pyromancer. And why is that? Well, so for Death World, they have the Wounded Beast feature, which combines a lot with a few of the talents from Blade Dancer, which requires them to get injuries and hurt themselves and yada yada. But then they also get ways to reduce damage they take from bleeding. Lifetime of Scars here, for example, will do less damage to you from fire, toxic, and bleeding damage based on your toughness. Whereas Forge World has something similar with Fires of the Forge, where they will take less damage from burning based on your toughness bonus. The other reason this is far superior for tanking versions is we get Steels of the Forge. While you're wearing heavy armor, you'll gain more movement, more deflection, which is actually phenomenal in the early game because the more deflection you have early, the better. And then, and more importantly, as of recording this video, they finally patched it so that you no longer fall prone while wearing this armor. This has been a bug for a little bit. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. But now it should completely work as of this recording. And it's personally one of my favorite builds just because you look really cool. You're this big tanky guy that sets yourself on fire, and then you run around and set other people on fire. So by selecting Forge World, you get three different options here. You get Analytics System, which increases your crit chance based on your intellect bonus. Don't pick this. You get Locomotion System, which increases your movement points and agility bonus to dodge as well. This is really good for assassin-type characters. However, we're going to be just sticking with tankiness all the way through and through, and we're going to pick Subskin Armor, which increases our armor further based on our toughness bonus. Pretty sweet. And it's a multiplicative bonus, by the way. So say we have 100 toughness, that's going to be 2 times 10, so that's 20 plus 5. So that's 25% bonus armor just by having a lot of toughness, and that's going to be one of our main stats, so it goes hand in hand. Then obviously we're going to be picking up the Psyker, and then the Pyromancer. Eventually down the road for this build, we will pick up a level of Biomancy, so we can pick up 2 specific talents, Biophysical Distortion, as well as Deterioration. Those are the main 2 that we're going to need. Anything else on that is just preference or your personal choice, or just, icing on the cake. But yeah, Biophysical Distortion and Deterioration are going to be phenomenal for this build. But for the majority of this build, we're going to be Pyromancer. As for the abilities we're going to be focusing on this build, we'll be focusing on Ignite, obviously, Firestorm, Inflame, and Orchestrate Flames. I love Orchestrate Flames. It's probably my favorite ability, but obviously Inflame is probably the stronger out of all of them. First, let's start off with Ignite. So the way that Ignite works is there's a bunch of math here, yada yada. The higher your psi rating is, and the higher your willpower bonus you have, the more damage you'll do with this ability. But typically the trick that we're going to be doing is using this ability to cast it on ourselves, to make ourselves start burning. And that will further increase our Psyker damage, as well as some other things, but we'll get into that a bit later. Then we have our Firestorm ability, which is also a pretty cool ability. When you target this on a target that's already burning, or say yourself that's burning, you will spread wherever that dot is to other people. You can't show it here. It doesn't show here for some reason. The targeting is just an AoE of around whatever you're selecting. So you can either do it yourself, or you run up to the next somebody on fire. So you can just run up to somebody while you are on fire, cast this on yourself, and you'll ignite everybody around you. Pretty cool. Or you can also do it to somebody else that's off in the distance that's already caught on fire. Say they're surrounded by a bunch of people. You can use Firestorm on them to blow up everyone around them. Then we have Orchestrate Flames, which is one of my favorite abilities. This makes it so that the targets will no longer try to put out the fire, or they can't even. Additionally, if you cast it on yourself or an ally, every melee attack they make will deal the full burning damage of the fire that they're undergoing. So, say your Warp Burn, or just any burning effects from like flamethrowers or whatever. However strong that tick damage is, before mitigation, mind you, that's how much damage you'll be doing with each strike. Hit or miss. So if somebody dodges you or parries you, you'll still do that full burning damage. And this will work with any attack in melee. So multi-hit attacks such as things with a chainsaw, not the chainsword, but the chainsaw, like the buzzsaw looking weapon. Or if you're dual wielding and using Blade Dance from Blade Dancer, for example, each of those Blade Dance attacks will deal the full fire damage on people, and it will always hit no matter what. The attacks from your Blade Dance might not always hit, but the burning will, and it's really cool. I can't wait to showcase that in a video coming up soon. But for all intents and purposes, this guide that we're looking at today is going to be covering the tankier Warrior Executioner. We'll be looking at the Glass Cannon Blade Dancer Pyromancer Executioner in another video. All right, so moving along, we then have Inflame. This is a really phenomenal ability, which only cares about your willpower bonus, doesn't care about your psi rating. Until the end of combat, all burning effects will deal more damage based on your willpower bonus. And then every burning creature in combat will immediately suffer damage on top of that. So this is going to pretty much be what you're casting every turn whenever you can. And then the higher willpower bonus you have, and if you say crits and stuff, you just blow everything up to smithereens. Especially with some of the ultimate abilities we're going to have later. That's pretty neat. Additionally, we also can play around with Incinerate. If you have a lot of targets that are on fire, you cast Incinerate on somebody, and then they're just going to blow up as well. Pretty cool. And then we have plenty of really good Pyro talents that we really want to keep an eye out for. The notable ones here are Relentless Blaze. Since we're going to be setting ourselves on fire, we'll increase our sight rating by 1 here, as you can see. Our resolve by 2. And then we don't lose any momentum from being caught on fire. So that's really huge. Others that we want to look at are Body of Flames, so that we take less damage to fire from ourselves and also from other laser, melta, or plasma weapons. So that's going to be handy in the defensive capabilities as well. We got Melting Armor, which reduces people's armor and deflection, which ultimately will mean more damage for us. And then also Sparks of the Greater Flame is really sweet because it will allow all of our dots to critically strike. As you see here, it actually shows you interactions with Does It Hurt, which is from Executioner, and some other things like that. Then we have other abilities here, like Blazing Inferno, which will increase our critical hit chance, but honestly, this one's just a little icing on the cake. You don't really need to grab it. Burning Blade is also a decent talent to pick up. It's kind of cheeky. It's more useful in the early game, but later levels, it's not really that impactful, so don't really worry about it too much. Yeah, ultimately here, we're looking for Relentless Blaze, Body of Flames, and Sparks of the Greater Flame. And then Melting Armor too. But yeah, so anyways, sorry for that tangent. Let's just continue on with our level 1 of the Pyromancer. We're getting way ahead of ourselves. I just wanted to explain a few things before we move forward. Alright. So, Sanctioned Psyker, Pyromancer. And then with our Triumph. Honestly, none of this stuff really matters too much. If you are going to be going for the tankier build, like you are if you're watching this video, I highly suggest going with the Feat of Greatness here so you can get more coercion, because the most coercion we have, the more deflection we're going to get with that sweet armor later. And then later for these, let's just go with the Grim Portents, because we don't really care about logic on this character. There are some times when we're by ourselves, it's just the Rogue Trader, where you have awareness and Lord Warp challenges that only you can do, so just get rid of the logic. We don't care about that. And as for your class, ultimately we're trying to become a warrior, and the classes that can become an executioner are the Blade Dancer, Operative, and the Warrior. But so again, for this video, we're going to be going with the tankier version of this build, so we're going to go with the Warrior into Executioner. Now, as for our stats, this is also an interesting part of the build. Obviously, we need to have willpower really high. We need to have toughness really high. And then the other thing to consider is having our strength kind of high. The reason being, we need to be wearing heavy armor. And to be able to wear heavy armor, you need to have at least a 45 into your strength. And the way that leveling up in this game works, at least for increasing your stats or your attributes, whatever you want to call it, or your characteristics, you can only increase a specific characteristic twice per archetype. We can increase our characteristic 5 times in one level, but each one can only be done twice. So we'll increase our willpower by 2, our toughness by 2, and then our strength by 1. But at level 1 here, we're going to put 2 points into strength, so that we start off at 40. That way we only have to invest one of those level ups to increase our 45 to get our heavy armor. And then we get our toughness to 50, and then our willpower to 45 right off the bat. Pretty solid lineup. Alternatively, you could bump up the intelligence to 40 if you so desired to increase all of these associated skill checks here. The most important ones here would be Medicae and Lore Warp. That is an option. Otherwise, you can just stick to having willpower at 45, but then it's always going to be odd. Really what matters for your stats is that they're even, because most abilities or skills in the game require your skill bonus, which is whatever the number is divided by 10. So increments of 5 don't really matter, increments of 10 do. So having a 45 here won't matter too much, but there are buffs to that throughout the game that will allow us to bump that up sky high. So it's really up to your preference if you want to start off with 45 willpower or 40 intelligence. I'm just going to go willpower here just to make it simple, because the main stats we want here are willpower and toughness. Once we get our strength to 45, you can put stuff balance wherever you want. Maybe weapon skill if you want to have your weapons more likely to land. And there you are. Here is your character. Now let's move on to the leveling guide. Alright, so moving right along, we're going to go ahead and show you the rest of this build. We'll be continuing our path along the warrior. We start off with charge, which is just a way to get some free movement and also get a free attack as well, because positioning is really key for this build. So charge is pretty handy. As for our skills, we're going to go with Medicae. Rank 3, obviously we get Endure, which helps us reduce damage that we take based on our toughness, which is why toughness is going to be one of our main stats. At level 4, we get our ultimate, which will do multiple attacks in a turn, although they all have to be melee, so that is something to consider. Sometimes you can actually use your Psyker abilities. It's really weird. Sometimes it works to use your Psyker abilities multiple times, otherwise you just get one instance of it, and then you do melee attacks the rest of it. But otherwise, it's a nice way to help get around. You do use this ultimate quite a bit until you get your Executioner ultimate. Also at rank 4, we will pick up our Psyker Minoris, which you can pick up right away at level 4 as a warrior. This is the character I played during this playthrough. And I also live streamed it, so you can also look at the VODs and watch it all in action. Yeah, you can pick up Psyker Minoris at level 4, and which will increase your psi rating. At level 5, we pick up our warrior talent, Thick Skin. This will increase our deflection and also increase your parry chance equal to 25% of your total armor. We'll also increase our willpower. That's going to be our main stat we're increasing here, followed by toughness, and then whatever else you desire. At level 6, we'll be picking up the spell Firestorm instead of any of our warrior abilities, because none of the warrior abilities actually really matter for us for this build. So we're going to be picking a lot of Pyromancer stuff here. So Firestorm will let you spread burning from either your Warp Burn or just burning in general, for say from Argentus Flamers or Flame Grenades or whatever you guys got. Or even Cassia's Warp Burn spells. You can either use it on yourself, which is most likely what you're going to do, and spread it to nearby enemies. Or you can also just pick a random person that already has burn that's in a big clump of enemies and then Firestorm right after. It's going to be one of our main damage abilities throughout most of the game. Until we get Inflamed, that is. Then at rank 6, you can keep picking up Medicae. Honestly, I should have, in hindsight. I did pick Coercion here because I was trying to plan for a armor that you get later in the game, but I goofed that up in this playthrough, so I'll mention that. So yeah, I highly suggest that you pick up Medicae and fully level this up first, followed by Coercion, or just focus on Coercion first and then Medicae. Coercion is really good because of a armor that you get later in the game. For this build, it's phenomenal. You get tons of deflection based off of your Coercion. But again, I goofed it up in this playthrough, so unfortunately I can't showcase it right this second. But afterwards, after I show you the build, I'll show you the item on one of my other characters. At level 7, we will pick up Willpower, as well as the passive Relentless Blaze. Because the main thing we're going to be doing this build is A, we're going to get really tanky, B, we're going to set ourselves on fire, and then we're going to set everyone else on fire. So whenever the Psyker is burning, the Psyker's sight rating is increased by 1, the Psyker's resolve is increased by 2, and then damage from fire no longer reduces our momentum. So we're going to light ourselves on fire and just go catch everyone else on fire on top of that. Rank 8, or level 8, we'll be leveling up our Coercion again, and also picking up Subtle Manipulation. Now this is a completely optional talent to pick up. I personally really like it because I like to get up front to people and just start smacking them around with our flame powers, and then we don't get attacks of opportunity. On higher difficulties, such as Unfair, this could potentially kill your character before you got a chance to set up, so having Subtle Manipulation is pretty solid to have. And with our upgrade, we picked up the second Warrior upgrade for our ultimate, which will let us get more movement points after we kill somebody. At rank 10, we pick up Clenched Teeth, which gives us more deflection to damage on the first attack made against us every combat. This will help us withstand a lot of boss attacks that only hit once, or maybe once or twice, but usually the big hit, they do one big hit, and this will help negate that. It's based on your toughness rating. Now that we max our willpower, we're going to increase 1 level of strength. The reason being is that we want to pick up heavy armor proficiency. This will allow us to become very tanky in the game. At rank 11, we'll be picking up my favorite spell, Orchestrate Flames. The target will no longer burn, and then additionally, if it's cast on an ally or yourself, every melee attack you make inflicts the full burning damage on the target on their attack. And the crazy thing I love about this spell was not only does it get stronger and stronger the more you set yourself on fire and cast in flame to make the fire even stronger, the fire always hits no matter what. At least that's what it seems like. So even if they parry your attack or dodge it, you'll still be doing that fire damage for free, which can be pretty nutty, actually. It works really well with multi-hit weapons or even with the Blade Dancer. So with your Blade Dancer, you're dual wielding, each of those little sword attacks will do extra flame damage, and you just shred them even more. But again, this is for the warrior version, so we don't want you to have the Blade Dancing thing. But anyways, Orchestrate Flames is really good. And then we also pick up heavy armor proficiency. At rank 12, or level 12, we'll pick up our toughness increase, and as well as Medicae. And at level 13, we'll pick up Steel of the Forge. And as of recording this, they finally fixed the patch for this to properly work. Maybe they heard me complaining so much during my live stream. While you're wearing heavy armor, you will get an additional deflection and movement point, which is really great in the early game. But the most important part of this is the ability to become immune to Prone. Prone is the most debilitating debuff in the entire game. Not only are you stunned, but people get advantage against you. And yeah, well, just by simply wearing heavy armor, you will be immune to that. So now it should work, and you won't be kicked around and pushed around a lot. Or at least you'll be pushed around, but you won't fall to your face. So that's really good. So now that we decided to max our Medicae and our Coercion, you can start investing in Lore Warp, you can invest in Carouse, whatever you so desire. At level 14, we'll increase our toughness, as well as picking up our next level of Psyker rating, the Psyker Majoris, which we'll pick up at 14. And then level 15, we round up our warrior class by picking up upgrade 3. Yeah. So for 1 round, the warrior becomes priority target for every enemy hit by their melee attacks, but more importantly, will gain 20% parry and 2 deflection until end of combat. The more parry you have, the more deflection you have, the less damage you'll be taking. Nice. So one thing to note in the early game, as you notice, we are kind of light on a lot of the warrior talents here because none of them are super critical for the Pyromancer. As you guys heard me on my live streams ramble on about, the Blademancer Pyromancer is incredibly powerful. However, they are both incredibly talent starved. Blade Dancer has a lot of talents that they want to grab because they're all fantastic. And then there's a lot of stuff that Pyromancer wants to grab. Whereas the warrior here, there's only a few of them that are actually like, oh, we must have these. And then there's a lot of more wiggle room for picking things that are not warrior talents, for example. So that's just something to consider. But the other thing too to note about this build, that you do need to invest points into strength as well as getting your heavy armor proficiency, and then some steel to forge on top of that if you wanted to use the heavy armor build. Otherwise, Blade Dancer is totally fine to pick, and we'll definitely be doing a build for that in the future as well. And it can do some incredible damage, not just with the fire attacks, but even just attacking with your swords and your blade dance. But anyways, here is the warrior part of the Pyromancer build, and we'll be moving on to Executioner. Alright, so here we are with the Executioner. There are some abilities I took in this playthrough that you can decide to take if you'd like yourself, or you can just skip them and pick something else, and I'll mention times when that comes into play. Anyhow, right off the bat, by picking the Executioner, it's very front-loaded for our build. We get one of the passes we get immediately, Forced Repentance. Basically makes it so whenever we inflict more damage over time effects on something they might already have, you'll take additional damage from the initial effect. This can do some pretty crazy stuff with Ignite, as well as Firestorm, with using our Where It Hurts ability, which we'll get to in a moment. It's really good, and this is one of the main reasons why I want to make sure our Medicae is as high as possible. Moving along, we got Scourge Strikes will now cause our melee attacks to cause bleed. This is nice to have, but you'll notice it requires strength bonus to really utilize. But that's okay. We are going to be attacking in melee quite often, but we're not expecting our attacks to land all the time either. But either way, free bleed is free bleed, so we're not going to complain about it. Now, the main reason why this class is so fucking good with the Pyromancer is this ability here, Where It Hurts. If the target of the Executioner's next successful attack is under any damage over time effects, this target will immediately suffer 3 instances of damage from each of those effects. So 2 instances of the Executioner makes a burst or area attack. So that's for like Firestorm, for example. The damage is dealt after all other effects on the attack are applied, and then all damage over time effects are removed from the target. Because sometimes you'll be making more bleeds on top of that, or burns even, and poison too. This ability is applied instead of Scourging Strikes, and removes all stacks of Forced Repentance. So this is pretty much how you're basically going to kill somebody, or just do massive amounts of damage on other people. I'll showcase some footage of instances where we just do shit tons of damage with Ignite, or Firestorm, or even Incinerate. This is a really fantastic ability, and it also works with your Carnival of Misery as well, your ultimate from the Executioner, and we'll get into that later. Alright, so at level 2 of our Executioner, we're going to go with one of the best abilities that a Pyromancer can have, Inflame. Now what this does is that until the end of combat, all burning effects will deal extra damage, and then every burning creature in combat immediately suffers damage. As you can see here, currently unbuffed, we are doing plus 14 more fire damage. And then the more willpower we have, the stronger this will get, and we have many ways to increase our willpower. Yeah, and Flame is really great, especially with one of the items we have, which looks like costs no AP, so we can just cast it for free all the time. And then you also can actually keep casting Inflame ahead of time as well. They will always have this debuff on them, so that way when they do eventually get the burning, if they're not already burnt, they'll just take a significantly more damage. So pretty much every turn, no matter what you're doing, you're casting Inflame to just keep increasing the flame every turn. It's awesome. Alright, so at rank 3, I did not pick up a Executioner talent, and instead I went with our Forge World talent, Fires of the Forge. Forge World characters will gain deflection against burning effect and flame weapons, and that will also include our Ignite ability. So we're setting ourselves on fire, this will help us reduce some of that damage. And then at rank 4, we get our ultimate Carnival of Misery. This is a fantastic ability, but it doesn't truly get really good until we get our first upgrade. So we're not going to be using this too much just yet. So keep enjoying your Daring Breach as much as you like, up until that point. Alright, at level 20, we get another ability point, which is always nice, and then we'll further increase our willpower. At 21, we also increase our willpower even further, and then we pick up a different talent I was just trying out called Invigorating Screams. Whenever an enemy in a 4-cell radius around the Executioner suffers damage from a damage over time effect, the Executioner will regain wounds based on your toughness bonus. This is actually a pretty cool ability, especially when you're using combination with Firestorm on yourself to spread it to other people. You'll just get shit tons of heals, especially if you combine it with Where It Hurts. It's really cool. Let's enhance the flames. And then... bye-bye. I really like it. It's not completely necessary for doing shit tons of damage, but since I'm going the tankier route, we're taking a lot of extra damage. This could help heal us. It's pretty cool. Alright, so at level 22, we can pick up another ability. Here, I decided to just pick up Molten Beam just to try it out. I don't necessarily think this one's really super worth it. You could easily skip this one and pick something else. You can opt for going into Pyromancer, as you see we pick up later. We can go ahead and pick up that now. Or we can go with Reckless Abandon, where we will replace our wounds with temporary hit points, and then while the Executioner has temporary wounds, all their melee attacks and damage over time effects will deal extra damage based on your maximum health. So that's a really cool ability to use for getting extra damage. Otherwise, we can go with Gift of Torment, which is also really cool to make yourself even tankier. But honestly, at level 22, instead of picking up Molten Beam here, I probably should have just picked up Biomancy and just get it right away. Alright. At 23, we picked up Acute Pain. Whenever an enemy suffers damage from a damage over time effect inflicted by the Executioner for the first time in combat, it'll deal 100% more damage. Pretty nice. Just extra damage up front. And then we increase our Coercion. Followed by that, we pick up our Toughness and pick up our next Psyker rating. We pick up our next Psyker rating talent, Psyker Terminus. Followed by another Psyker ability. I did not go with the Executioner one here. We went with Burning Blood. When the Psyker uses a psychic power, all enemies adjacent to the Psyker will suffer 28 direct damage. The same also applies when the Psyker suffers damage from burning, bleeding, or melee attacks. Burning Blood, it's kind of like a win more talent. Like, it's not super critical to it. I kind of like it having it in the early game, but it definitely falls off a lot later. Because we're only going to be doing damage based on whatever your psi rating is. So, but it is guaranteed damage. And then eventually when you get into higher levels in the unfair difficulty, enemies are going to have such high HP that getting 28 cheeky damage here and there, maybe 3 times around, so what, maybe 100 damage for free, isn't really going to mean much when the opponent has over 6,000 health. So this is more valuable in the early game. You don't have to pick up this talent. Alright, and then following that, we will pick up Toughness, as well as Coercion. And then we finally get to our upgrade of our ultimate. And we're going to pick the third upgrade, which is phenomenal. This is pretty much carries the whole class, honestly. All enemies in combat immediately suffer bleeding, burning, and toxin. The level of each of these is equal to your character's level divided by 10. And it's no save or anything, so no matter what, you're going to guarantee all those dots on them. So speaking of the toxin, so this talent right here, Burning Blood, instead of picking up that, if you already picked up Biomancy at level 22, you can go ahead and pick up Biophysical Distortion to get that free toxin, by the way. So that's something to consider. And then, yeah, having Carnival of Misery is freaking awesome. And then you can combo Carnival of Misery, followed up immediately after by casting Inflame afterwards, just do stupid amounts of damage. Alright, following that talent, I picked up Body of Flames here, which will increase your armor against fire damage and half that amount against energy types like Las, Melta, and Plasma Guns. It is actually pretty useful for a tank standpoint. For against the Las, Melta, and Plasma stuff, it's pretty solid. Otherwise, we can pick up talents such as Does It Hurt, which will make your dots crit, and you can also combine that with the Pyromancer talent, Sparks of the Greater Flame, which also helps you crit. They both stack with each other. But right here, I went with Body of Flames because again, we're going to the tankier build, and we're going to pick up that other stuff later. Alright, now that we have our Toughness and our Willpower maxed up, I went with Agility for some reason. I don't know why. I think we're just trying to even it out, maybe. And then I decided to increase our Lord Warp. Alright, now, so this next ability here, we went with our Biomancy. Obviously, we could have skipped it since we picked Molten Beam earlier in this playthrough. By now, you should have had Biomancy instead of this Biomancy at this level, in which case I would highly recommend picking up Reckless Abandon, or Gift of Torment to do more damage with your dots, or become tankier from your dots. Something to consider, especially if you're playing on the unfair difficulties, where survivability could be very key for some fights, especially those incredibly stupid, overpowered DLC fights. You know what I'm talking about in Act 4. Alright, then we picked up Maddening Flames. This is a pretty cool ability to make all your flames have CC potential. The issue I don't like about it is that if the CC does work, they become prone, and then the burning is removed, so you lose a little bit of damage there. Otherwise, you should definitely pick up Does It Hurt and the other fire talent, Greater Flames. Alright, then rounding up our last of a few talents of our execution levels, I picked up All-Encompassing Agony, which will just flat out increases our damage from our dots by 30% if we have Bleed, Toxin, and Burning, which we will have easily from our ultimate, or by just, attacking somebody with melee at this point, because we'll be inflicting Bleed and Toxin on any attack we do with our melee strikes. Well, really, Toxin, we do everything on anything we do, no matter what. And otherwise, we will increase our weapon skill, so make sure our attacks land a little bit better. It's not super necessary. And then we round up the last common talent with Psyker Extremis, which gets us another point of Psyker rating. And then with our last upgrade to our Carnival Mastery, we picked up the first option. Until end of turn, all toxin and burning effects from any source inflicted on the Executioner enemies ignore their target's armor and deflection, which is huge. And then damage from all bleeding effects from any source inflicted by the Executioner's enemies is increased by an additional 30%. Alright, cool. Main thing that we're looking at here is for the ignoring armor and deflection. This will help us be allowed to just penetrate people and destroy them from within. Alright, so now we are looking at our Exemplar levels. And I did a little bit of experimenting here, trying to figure out what is some of the stuff we want to get right away. Right now, I just picked up Cataclysm for every first level of Exemplar. All damage dealt by you is increased by 3% until end of combat for every new enemy you've damaged in combat. This will allow us to just do a lot of damage, especially if there's a lot of people around. The more people there are, the more damage we'll do. It's pretty straightforward. I would have gotten something with critical velocity, but since we're wearing heavy armor, we're not going to have the highest dodge rating. So this would have been critical velocity would have been really nice if we had a higher dodge rating, but we don't. We're tanks. I then decided to forego another warrior talent, and I picked up Melting Armor. Every time an enemy suffers damage from the Psyker, that enemy's armor is reduced by 5%, and if there's no more armor, they reduce their deflection. And then we further increase our coercion. And then I kind of goofing around here with this other talent. I picked up Backdraft just to try it out. He does a little bit of damage here and there, but it's definitely not necessary. Alright, then we picked up Deterioration. This is from your Biomancy talents. Whenever an effect applied by the Psyker increases the damage suffered by a target, this effect is increased by half. For example, a 20% increase becomes 100%, or 30%. The reason I said 100% now, because I was mixing it up with the talent we get from our Executioner Acute Pain. So right here it says this 20% becomes 30%. Well, oops, let's go back. That means Acute Pain here, instead of increasing this damage by 100%, it'll be 150, for example. So that's a really good talent to have. You can probably pick it up early if you so desire. For the ability here, I chose to go with Incinerate, because it actually can do quite a significant amount of damage if there are fights where you just have a lot of chaff units and you happen to get them all burning thanks to the Carnival of Misery. So you can combine the Carnival of Misery with followed up by an Incinerate, and it will do significant amounts of damage, especially if you have high Psi rating. And then we leveled up Coercion again. The next talent we picked at level 40, we went with Grievous Wounds. Enemies that have 0 deflection or 0% armor against the character's attacks suffer 10% additional damage from the character. If the enemy has both 0 deflection and 0 armor, those bonuses stack. So 20%. Pretty solid. The more damage we do, the better. Then we picked up the Racking Weakness Executioner ability. The Racking Weakness Executioner talent. The damage dealt by the Executioner's damage over time is increased by 3% for every minus 10 penalty to armor suffered by the target from any source. And that's based on your Medicae. So you want to have your Medicae up pretty high. Then we increase our willpower. And then at this point is when I pick Sparks of the Greater Flame. And then I picked up the ability from the Executioner, a Gift of Torment, to make ourselves tankier. I probably should have taken Reckless Abandon earlier, but that's okay. And then we increase our toughness. And then we finally picked up Does It Hurt? If we picked up Does It Hurt and Sparks of the Greater Flame much earlier, we probably would have had a lot easier time on some fights, but we didn't have too much problem when we were pretty tanky and we just killed things quite well anyways. And then for funsies, I picked up Blade of Light. There are a lot of really good talents that are honorable mentions for the Exemplar, such as Combat Meditation. If we have no ranged weapons equipped, we get 15% willpower. Sorry, plus 15 willpower. Tough as Steel is a pretty decent one, because it just has a shit ton more HP. Pretty solid. Although HP isn't too necessarily important for this build, since we're not a Blade Dancer, so we're not sacrificing our HP for anything, so we don't really worry about that. Otherwise, Perfection on our Fire is always good too for more stats. And honestly, at this point in the game, you're going to be steamrolling through things anyway, so it doesn't really matter too much on what you're going to pick. So pick whatever you desire. These are what I went for the most part, and it's worked out quite well. Some of these I probably should have picked earlier, but that's quite all right. And then now we'll go over some of our choices in the game, such as going with Dogmatic for this playthrough. I do plan on playing Heretical in the tournament that's upcoming, but Dogmatic, at least a second rank, is really important for this build because we get the ability called Absolution. In the first round of combat, all critical hits scored by the Rogue Trader's party inflict burning. In addition, all fire damage suffered by enemies are increased by 1 for each conviction Dogmatic rank. So this is really cool, especially if our character hasn't gotten a chance to go first, and say somebody like Argenta or Gabella or whoever, or even Cassia. Sometimes her abilities crit. If you just get a bunch of crits or damage all around on the first round, you just get a bunch of fire, and that can help you spread more stuff with your Executioner and Pyromancer. Alright, otherwise, we can go into the items. And you can see here, we're using a chainsaw. But we'll get into that in a moment. Starting off, you can probably tell it already by just looking at that icon, that is the Eyes of the Joyous. The wearer's psi rating is increased by 1 for every level of Dogmatic you have. It is only supposed to apply to demons, but, you know, hey, we're going to be utilizing this until that gets fixed, I suppose. Otherwise, there are some other helmets you could go with, but that's what I'm using right now. Our armor we just picked up after beating the DLC final boss. It's a pretty solid heavy armor suit. Gives you considerable amounts of deflection if you have good enough toughness. It also increases our armor quite a bit as well. And yeah, it's pretty nice. Pretty solid armor. Nothing super crazy. Like I mentioned, there is a really good set of armor that you can get if you didn't goof up a planet like I did. But so here is the correct armor I was mentioning by having so much high coercion. It's right here. It is called Arbitrator Solomon's Rear's Armor. It has a little effect about hitting criminals. Who cares about that? What we're here for is that juicy amount of deflection. As you can see on the bottom here. If you hover over it, it's based on your coercion. So the higher your coercion, the higher your deflection will be. We have a whopping 18 deflection and 90% armor, and this is at level 38, by the way. And the way to get this is by your colony management. So if you are playing as a heretical character and you just pick any heretical option, you don't care what about reading or anything like that, make sure you don't pick the heretical version on Foulstone when you do that little storybook section, because you will completely lose out on this planet, and that is how we get this armor, as well as a few other really good things. So if you lose out on Foulstone, you lose out on this amazing armor. So that's just something to note. For our necklace, we're using the Anatomist Amulet, which increases the amount of stacks that we produce from bleeding, burning, or toxin effects. We're an Executioner, so it just goes hand in hand with this build. Otherwise, you can just go with something that gives you more psi rating, because more psi rating is always really nice. But the main source of abilities that we're using is going to be from Inflame, which is really just cares about your willpower. But there are some other stuff that we could utilize that actually cares about your Psyker bonus, such as Ignite and some Orchestrate Flames as well, to a degree. For our accessories, this is probably one I think is one of the most must-haves, the Spirit Drape, that wears non-attack Psyker powers. Costs 1 AP less during the wearer's first turn in combat. So this is really nice to help really set up things and just do some shenanigans, more or less. Doing self buffs, just casting Inflame for free every turn, because even though it does damage, it's not considered a damage dealing. Rather, it's not considered an attack power. So just be able to use Ignite twice in the first turn is pretty sweet. In the way of getting Officer extra turns, by the way. And we'll get into the rotation of how you play this character in just a moment. The other one we have right here is called Hand of Offense. The wearer's melee attack is increased by 21, which is just 3 times your psi rating, as you can see here. Pretty solid. Nothing super crazy, because honestly, we're not going to be landing too many attacks here, because you see our weapon skill is pretty freaking low right now. So that's just something to keep in mind of. But it's just something to have. Otherwise, there are some other trinkets that also increase your psi rating or give you extra attacks, which are pretty handy. And speaking of hands, we have the Executioner's Gauntlets. This increases the critical damage of where it hurts, including the damage from the attack itself and extra instances of damage over time effects. And that is based on your Medikai. So make sure you get your Medikai up pretty high. In that sense, too, you can also get other accessories that increase your Medikai for even more Medikai goodness. For our backpack here, we have Pack of Regents. You get this in Act 2, I believe. This set this just increases your bleeding, burning, and toxin effects, but by another 2. So obviously these kind of go hand in hand. At this point in the game, in Act 4 and beyond, they're not super critical in having, but it's just still nice to have, just get that stuff going. Also in Act 2, we get the Pyromaniac boots. These are okay. It's just neat if you actually happen to be standing on burning cells, like say from grenades or whatever, and you can add more burning on people. Alright, now as for our weapon, we're just using this chainsaw here. Why is that? Well, our typical rotation is casting Toughness on ourselves, Endure, igniting ourselves to set ourselves on fire, and then casting Orchestrate Flames. And then if we inflame, we'll increase the flame damage we're doing to ourselves, and in turn, we'll increase the damage we do from Orchestrate Flames, and each attack dealt by this chainsaw will do that extra Orchestrate Flames damage, whether we hit or not. And the chainsaw here does 4 attacks. And it also works on charges. You'll get all 4 attacks on a charge. So that's something to consider. Pretty cool. But obviously, it's not going to do nearly as much damage as, say, a Blade Dancer, Pyromancer, in terms of just the melee attacks with Orchestrate Flames. But we'll get into that at another time in a different build for his build. But yeah, so this is my Pyromancer at the moment. You also use the Force weapons, but I have them on a different character right now because I'm trying to showcase other builds as well. But yeah, this character, mostly I'm just using the chainsaw. We try to be as tanky as possible. We set ourselves on fire. We go around to other people. We'll cast Firestorm on everyone in the biggest group possible. We'll use where it hurts to maybe do as much damage with either Ignite or Incinerate. There's a lot of different methods on how to use this Pyromancer Executioner. If you'd like to see more, feel free to head on over to my VODs of my live playthroughs, and you can see it in action in the various acts. I really hope you like this guide. And if you feel like it helped you in any way, or if you feel there's some ways you can improve it, by all means, go ahead and leave a comment down in the comment section. Please like, comment, subscribe for more guides like this. And I'll see you in the next one. Farewell for now.